The Gargoyle King roars with all the might of his throat, crossing both of his swords. Sharp teeth are ready to tear apart 3 people who dared to come out against him. Shelly looks at his 30th level with fear. This is much higher than they expected, and therefore they were not ready for this at all. However, Shelly can't afford to back down. She is not at all the type of person who gives up in front of obstacles once you see them. Frank gives Schultz the order that she should attack after him, and he himself will act first, to which Shelly readily nods. Frey says that you can't drag out a fight with an opponent whose level is an order of magnitude higher than your own. In such situations, you should act quickly. He clutches the weapon in his hands, putting his mana into it. A man attacks the Gargoyle King using his cutting wave skill. The monster reflects the blow without any problems, which, however, Frey expected, but this provides an opportunity for a new attack, because it has opened. The commander raises his sword over his head, intending to strike again with the hope that at least this time it will work. But even this had no effect. There is a flash from the clash of weapons, and Frank sees that he could not even scratch him properly. The rough skin of the king remained intact, as it was. Then Shelly enters the fight, who has only been waiting for this opportunity. She runs at him without showing a drop of fear, although the monster's level is high. But it's not that fast, so she has every chance of winning. Besides, Schultz has no equal in sword fighting. Her skill, Princess of the Sword, at times increases her talent for fencing. The king has reopened, and the girl hits him with a sharp swing of the sword. One more flash and it is visible, and this action did not have a result. Shelly had such a strange, cringing feeling, as if she hadn't done any damage to him at all, although the girl had definitely walked a blade through his body. Now it's Guido's turn to attack. His arrow flies straight at the king. The sharp arrowhead shatters against the monster's skin, as if it was made of glass, not iron. Gilland, drenched in cold sweat, realizes that he has no chance as well as the rest of the team. Arrows are useless against the king. Frank, breathing heavily from such rapid attacks from both sides, analyzes their chances of winning and comes to a disappointing conclusion. The monster has a high defense index, but low speed, and yet this monster is generally too tough for them. It is simply impossible to inflict damage with a sword or arrows due to high protection. And if so, then damage can only be done by hitting the eyeballs. The monster is not going to wait for the opponents to gather their strength. He swings a huge sword and hits the team commander hard. Frey can hardly stand it, clenching his teeth until his jaw aches, forcing himself to think in the meantime how to get out of this deplorable situation. The commander is trying to force himself to think, because if he does not come up with anything, not only will they not leave this dungeon with nothing, having coped with overpopulation, they will not leave here at all with their heads on their shoulders. The monster's greedy eyes stop on Frank, and then the floor under the two of them begins to glow red. Frey stands with his feet right on the star, which is enclosed in a perfectly even circle. The man himself seems very low compared to the king. Frank, after this star lit up under him, realizes with panic that the king also owns magic, which, of course, does not bring joy in such a deplorable situation. The monster uses his fire roar skill, and a fire vortex surrounds his huge body. With a scarlet flame, he throws Frank back a few meters. Rising from the ground, Frey clamps the wound on his arm. The sleeves of his clothes are half burned, and the skin is bleeding. Balls of steam come out of the mouth. He looks over his shoulder at his colleague. Judging by the appearance, Shelly is fine, but she is clearly losing confidence in her own abilities with every second. There is less and less time to get out of the underworld alive. Frank tightens his grip on the sword in his hand. If now he, as a leader, shows weakness, lets them see that they cannot win this battle, then they will all be finished. There is no way to retreat now. The fighter cuts through the air again with the cutting wave skill, leaving the space to sparkle with blue light. There may not be another chance to attack, so Frey decides to act now. Frank fearlessly jumps straight into the flames, not afraid to die. Shelly opens her mouth, shouting after him that did he really decide to use what she was thinking about. The monster roars with rage. Frey uses his strongest blow on him, decapitation, after which a very small number of monsters remained alive. The man's sword cuts through the air with blue lightning, and the flame eats up his air around him. Turning back for a moment, he orders Guido to start the attack right now. The young man quickly pulls the arrow. He can't help but shout that the commander is doing everything extremely recklessly. Nevertheless, the arrow flies out of the bowstring, dissecting the space with a green light. It hits the center of the king's blue eye, which is located in the middle of the gargoyle's belly and which he seems to have deliberately opened as much as possible. Frank lands neatly on the ground, glad that they were finally able to fully attack. It remains to deliver the last, decisive blow, and then it will be possible to celebrate the victory. But it was too early to relax. The commander's eyes cling to the king's movements. The monster turns out to be dissatisfied with the fact that he was still able to injure. He strikes red magic directly at a man who is trying to defend himself with a sword. The king manages to knock the handle out of his fingers, and Frank tumbles to the ground. The commander's body no longer moves, and although he does not move, he still continues to breathe, which is good news. Guido, realizing the plight of the bottom, orders the girl to forget about their leader and immediately run away. Above Frey stands the king, who is going to finally deal with his defeated opponent. However, Shelley is not going to back down so easily, much less abandon her loyal colleague. She boldly stands between the monster and Frank. Schultz seems like a bug in front of such a formidable opponent. Guido looks at the girl with annoyance, dissatisfied with her act and scolding her for how stubborn she is. He puts an arrow in the string. After a while, Shelley is still standing in front of the king, but now she is on her knees. Blood runs down her face, and she leans on her sword to keep from falling from fatigue. Behind her, Guido lies motionless. His arrows have fallen out of his quiver, and the bow lies slightly in front of the owner, who clearly recently fell out of his hands. Breathing heavily, she realizes that even though she couldn't stop Frey from that reckless attack that almost cost him his life, so now she can't leave him to die here. Shelley clenches her teeth tightly. She should have run earlier. Now it's too late for a shameful retreat. She apologizes to Guido, who is the only one among them who initially did not want to go for this monster. Gilland, beaten, lies on the ground, but slightly raises himself on his elbows to answer and asks the girl not to talk such nonsense. He closes his eyes. The guy is not going to blame anyone for this. In the end, Guido himself made the decision to fight, and therefore the girl should not bear the heavy burden of guilt at all. The guy loses consciousness, and it is not clear whether he died or just breathes too weakly. Schultz looks at him in amazement. She is grateful to him for having her back, even though he may not have liked her very much. The king raises his hand to kill the last opponent, and Shelley no longer rushes into battle with her head, realizing that she can no longer do anything without anyone's help. All she has to do is close her eyes and accept defeat along with a heavy blow from the gargoyle. Someone behind her picks up Frank's sword. But time passes, and Schultz is still alive. She timidly opens her eyes, not understanding why it happened. In front of her is Chrome, who says he can't afford to just stand and watch these people die. He holds the sword by the hilt and by the blade, stopping the monster's blow, and clenching his teeth tightly from how strong he is. Mimic shouts that he is now the opponent of this stone bastard. He won't let these guys fight alone anymore. There are bruises and abrasions on Schultz's face, but she does not pay attention to them, and her arm is also injured, judging by the way she holds onto it. Shelley recognizes the guy with the mask they met earlier. It even turns out that Guido is still conscious, albeit with difficulty, but he raises his head to ask why he came for them. Chrome remembers with a sigh and a slight dissatisfaction why he did this. Before coming here, the guy was sitting on the floor of the cave, head downcast, and realized that it was too risky to follow the team. They will very quickly realize that he is a monster, one of those whom adventurers kill every day. If they recognize him, they'll have to fight 3 at once, and they didn't seem like bad people. But Chrome doesn't let his doubts consume him. What is he even thinking about? The guy abruptly rises from the floor. It is not about what is right, but about the fact that Chrome himself wants to do as he wishes. After all, this is the reason why Mimic wanted to become an adventurer, that in his past life, that in this one, the desire to save other people moved him all his life. But fate did not give Chrome any useful talent or skill. The guy dreamed of fighting monsters and protecting innocent people. Shelley, Guido, and Frank are risking their own lives to save a million others. Why, then, should Chrome act like a coward and abandon them? The guy is able to help them and at the same time not become a heavy burden. He rushes in the direction in which the team disappeared in order to have time to help them. Chrome's thoughts go back to the Gargoyle King in front of him. Although the Mimic wounded him, but their difference in levels is simply colossal, it is not surprising that the team could not defeat them, even with experience in battles behind them. While the monster has the 30th level, Chrome has only the 21st. The amount of mana of the king is 44 units, and the guy has only 23, despite the fact that he uses it for the skill reincarnation. Barely holding the king's sword with his own, the guy curses and eventually retreats, almost falling on his back. He realizes that he will definitely not be able to cope alone, but is it possible to expect help from the wounded Guido and Shelley? It would be better to escape right now, but again, the conditions of all 3 leave much to be desired. Frank Chrome may inform, but he will not have enough strength for Schultz and Gilland. The actions of people still did not leave the monster unscathed. They wounded his head and eye on his stomach, which is also the weak point of the monster. Like the fighters before him, Chrome understands that the weakest point of the monster is the organ of vision on the stomach, which is not covered by anything. The king hits the mimic right in the chest, causing him to step back again, almost falling, and the monster seems to grin, pleased with his own attack. Then scarlet blood sprays in all directions from the wound on the mimic's chest. Shelly screams that such a wound is fatal, and Guido wonders how he is still standing on his feet. Chrome's eyes light up green, indicating that he is using one of his skills. The gargoyle roars with rage, seeing that the enemy is still on his feet and is not going to give up. And it's true, Chrome swings his weapon and says that even though he was distracted, he is stronger than it seems at first glance. He's aiming for the blue eye. The king brandishes his weapons, as if not seeing the mimic in front of him. While the monster is about to launch a counterattack, Chrome uses regeneration to heal a deep wound on his chest. The mimic has a very strong body, and with such regeneration it is simply impossible to kill him. The guy calls the bully for the second round, standing in a fighting stance. The king, apparently realizing that the enemy's weapons cannot penetrate, uses a fiery roar, as he did in the fight with Frank. The mimic squints. He has put fire magic on himself. Then Chrome jumps away from the fire, not letting himself be hurt, but regretfully realizes that if everything goes on like this, he will not get to the king in any way. The monster lowers his sword on the fighter, shattering the stone floor, but the guy manages to jump aside. Immediately realizing that the idea was extremely disastrous, it turns out the mimic is in a dead end, from where it is no longer possible to hide somewhere. Chrome's eyes reflect how the opponent raises the sword. He won't be able to dodge it. Shelly looks at this scene with a sinking heart. She can't help the mimic, and even if she could, in any case she has already lost to the gargoyle. Now the chrome will come to an end. A purple flash flashes. However, the expected does not happen. The monster is buzzing with irritation. His sword is held by gray hands with long black claws, which do not belong to the person Chrome turned into. The king exhales fire from his nostrils. Chrome's gaze burns red, and he cheekily asks if the king really thought he was done with him. The guy even grins at how pleased he is with himself. It was a very successful move on the part of the mimic. The opponent has opened his belly, from which Frank's sword now sticks out, and with his other hand he continues to hold the king's weapon. The monster roars furiously. Shelly can't believe that such a frail-looking guy managed not only to stop the attack, but also to wound the same eye on his stomach. The girl does not understand who this man is. Where does such a superpower come from? The flames begin to surround both the monster and the guy, hiding in a scarlet whirlpool. The monster's fire reaches the hand that holds the sword, and Chrome winces at how hot it is. A sharp tip, engulfed in fire, tends to hit the enemy. Mimic picks up his weapon and dodges to the side. Unfortunately, the gargoyle was not as simple as it might have seemed at first. He inflicted a mortal wound on the king, and he is still able to fight, although purple blood flows from the wound. Dodging again, he realizes that he can't attack him back. With a new attack, Chrome runs away to the side and takes time for a short-term respite. Thanks to regeneration, he was able to overcome the fire curtain without being hurt, but he can't carry out a retaliatory strike, because his mana is almost at 0. There are only 5 units left out of the 28 maximum, and the level is not even comparable to the level of the monster, the 21st, while the gargoyle has the 30th. The difference, it would seem, is small, but it's too much for a mimic. Things are getting worse and worse. It's just disgusting. Not only can Chrome no longer use regeneration, so at this rate, reincarnation will also become impossible to use, because mana will end earlier, and then Shelly and Guido will see his true face, which of course is not good. However, it is impossible not to notice that the stone idiot, like the mimic, is at the limit of his capabilities. Now the question is, which of them will run out of steam first? A bright flame envelops the monster's body. Chrome clenches his teeth tightly, feeling the warmth of the fire. Because of this coating, he cannot get closer to him. If the mimic reincarnates into his true form, it will only scare those guys with whom he definitely does not want to deal, but not the enemy in front of him. Stalemate. The earth is shaking from the powerful step of the king. Chrome really has nowhere to retreat this time. Shelly is trying to get up from her knees to the side. She forces her body to move on the mere thought that if the girl does nothing, then their savior will die. Guido reaches for the bow lying not far from him and grabs it tightly. He shoots an arrow and orders this guy not to even think about dying here, because he hates being in debt to someone. The arrow flies past the mimic, and he does not even understand where it is flying, because it does not get close to the monster. Looking closer, Chrome sees that the arrow hits the stone ceiling, which needs very little to fall on other people's heads. A huge boulder falls right on top of the king's head. Mimic mentally praises Guido for a great blow, because he hit right on the head. This is a great chance to kill such a strong opponent. Chrome thrusts the sword deeper than last time into the eye on his stomach, so that now he will surely hit the monster. He jumps back as a wall of flames surrounds the king. Purple blood spurts from the wound. Although the weak spot has been attacked twice, the gargoyle continues to stand on its feet. It is worth attacking him exactly at the moment when the monster is vulnerable, but because of that strong attack, Chrome dropped the sword, which now lies under the monster's feet. There's nothing to be done. You'll have to go into battle with bare hands, which the guy has, compared to ordinary human ones, are gray, and the nails on his palms are long and sharp. He jumps into the flames and screams that this bastard is about to come to an end, and then punches him in the eye. The green glow overlaps the red one coming from the monster. The mimic stands over the defeated and realizes that he has emerged victorious. He defeated the dungeon boss of the 30th level. Such a victory was expensive. The system message says that 630 points were received by Chrome. The level has been upgraded from 21 to 25. In this world, dungeons are places with evil magical energy that attract a bunch of monsters. Such spaces also create wonderful habitats for monsters. The boss of the dungeon is the very first monster that settled in the depths of the underworld and became a kind of source of huge magical energy for the rest of the evil spirits. Now, thanks to Chrome and the team, the boss is crushed. Overpopulation will stop for a while. The hierarchy among the monsters with the loss of the leader will change significantly, which will take some time, and everything will thus return to normal. The last question remains: did Guido and Shelly see Chrome's partial conversion during his fight with the gargoyle? Perhaps they did, considering Guido's suspicious gaze, which burns his back with his eyes. Jillian reflects on what happened. There is no doubt that this guy saved them all, while they, trained adventurers, could not deal with the dungeon boss. He did not just kill the king, but defeated him alone. Even managed to deliver the final decisive blow with his bare hands. Who is Chrome? From where does it have such power? With all this, the stranger's physique is quite fragile. His arms and legs are thin. Chrome is happy about how well he raised the level thanks to this battle, and even saved the guys from seemingly imminent death. It just turned out great. Now it remains to raise the level exactly in half, from 25 to 50. The guy became one step closer to the stage of a new evolution among monsters. Shelly approaches. She thanks Chrome from the bottom of her heart for saving her, because without him they would definitely not have coped and died an inglorious death. The girl calls her name and smiles sweetly. The guy hurriedly removes the information window so that Schultz does not see that his race is not human at all. Shelly asks to introduce herself in response. Chrome seems to be panicking even more. His mana is almost at 0. A little more time, and he will turn back into a monster, having lost all human appearance. His skill reincarnation temporarily allows you to take human form. Consumes 1 mana unit in 10 minutes. Chrome, meanwhile, has only 2 mana divisions left, which is only enough for 20 minutes. You need to take it now, otherwise it will be too late later. Shelly tries to touch the stranger's shoulder to find out the name after all, but Chrome does a very stupid, but in his situation the only right thing, rushes away. Everything is very bad. It is no longer possible to keep in shape, and Shelly definitely should not see him in this form. Schultz looks sadly after him. He ran away again. Guido also looks at the fleeing back of the fugitive. In his opinion, this type is extremely strange. The guy approaches the monster's corpse and says that the stranger didn't even collect the monster from the boss. The king's eye is proof that overpopulation in the dungeon has been stopped. For such a mission, you could get a whole lot of money. Shelly is delighted with this man. He did not take the award and did not even give his name. How humble is this person? Guido is more skeptical about what is happening. He hardly believes that there are such fools in the world. However, Guido cares the least about why the guy didn't take the award. He is most concerned about the question of why the stranger was here all alone, and how he was able to heal those fatal wounds. Could it be that the dungeons have such an effect on him? Suddenly Frank gets up from the ground on trembling legs, who immediately says with a sneer that Guido, as usual, thinks too much. The guy is amazed that the commander is still alive. Frey replies that this stranger didn't leave them in trouble and saved their lives without asking for something in return, so there's no point in looking for some ulterior motive. Guido doubtfully agrees with the commander. Frey's sword is still sticking out of the king's eye, all stained with purple blood. Guido grabs the hilt of the sword with both hands and sits down on his knees to pull out the eye. Frank asks the subordinate to take his time and take out, as carefully as possible, in the end, a valuable and most importantly expensive artifact. Shelly still doubts that they should do this because they did not defeat the gargoyle. Frank has a different opinion. They need the organ as proof that this dungeon is no longer dangerous. He promises that if they meet that guy again, we will give him the reward we received from the guild. Shelly wonders if they will meet again, and is already eager to meet again. Somewhere deep in the dungeon, Chrome rests his hand on his knee to catch his breath. A little more and I would have been caught. The guy was walking right on the edge. Chrome may have lasted a little longer, but the frequent use of such a skill as regeneration spent a decent amount of mana. The good news is that at the 25th level, the Mimic has 36 mana points. Chrome sits down on a rock, already with a mask on his face. If reincarnation spends 1 unit in 10 minutes, then you can hold out for even more than 6 hours. With the right calculation, it should take half a day to recover half of the mana. If so, Chrome can secure a shelter with people in the village. Somewhere far away, a sleeping Carme in a dream thinks about where her stupid brother has gone. Mimic gathers his strength. You need to try to get out of this dungeon in order to test his theory. Clouds float over the kingdom of Rebirth. In the Adventurers Guild, people are vying to ask each other if it's true that Frank, Guido, and Shelly have dealt with the overpopulation of monsters in a dungeon in the West. Others are amazed that these three defeated even a monster, although everyone knows how strong these creatures are. Frey can't help but smile, even though he's trying to smile less obviously. Shelly has a confused and even sad face. She is clearly still thinking about the escaped Chrome. And Guido, as usual, is just not happy with everything that is happening. Frank skillfully talks about how they killed this monster. He says that everything he told is true. The man has never seen a boss of such a high level. However, if it weren't for the three of them, the western dungeon would quickly turn into a nest of monsters that would come out and attack civilians. Guildmaster Hans appears, whose long gray beard testifies to the wisdom of years. The old man wears round glasses on his nose. He notices that he can hardly believe that only 3 adventurers were able to defeat the boss of the underworld, who surpassed their level. Fran easily admits that there were not 3 of them at all. The master was not mistaken here. Hans frowns, not understanding what he is talking about. He asks what he means. Shelly steps forward, waving her hands, happily begins to tell that what Frank said is true. In the dungeon they met a boy who helped them defeat the boss. Hans tilts his head a little to one side in perplexity and, frankly, looks at her as if she is crazy. Does this girl want to tell him that thanks to the help of some boy they were able to defeat the dungeon boss? The master turns away from Shelly, thinking that she must have been in the dungeon for too long and her mind was clouded by the magical miasma. Schultz turns out to be outraged by this assumption. She shouts that this is the purest truth and pokes her fingers into her eyes, describing that stranger. He had gray-haired hair with pale skin, and his gaze was menacing. A smiling mask hung on his head. Shelly says she's not lying. She saw it all with her own eyes. Guido inserts his word that a colleague is overpraising him too much. As far as he remembered, that guy's gaze was lifeless. In fact, the aura around him was just creepy. His cheeks were sunken, as if he was being starved, and his skin was pale and painful. Gillen grumbles about how she overpraises him, but Shelly says that, on the contrary, Guido belittles the merits of their savior. Frank interrupts their argument. He admits that Schultz describes him too colorfully, but without this guy they would not have come out of this dungeon alive. Hans says he can't believe such words. In the end, it really looks like a fairy tale. Some unidentified kid appeared, helped kill the boss of the underworld himself and disappeared into the sunset. Then Frank provides his most important proof. No one talks about blind faith in their stories, because they brought the eye of the Gargoyle King. This is a weighty argument, isn't it? He proudly shows a pouch that glows red and it is immediately clear that a dangerous high-level artifact lies in it. Other people from the guild are amazed at their find. A strong magical energy emanates from the bag in which the eye lies. It also proves that some white-haired boy really helped the team and didn't even take the reward for it. For the most part, the guild members are outraged. It was impossible to defeat such a boss and not pick up the reward is complete nonsense. Why would a person just take and give up a bunch of money? There are whispers that maybe he's just a village fool who didn't know at all that you can get money from such cases or just likes to wave his fists for nothing. Shelly goes into dreams that, probably, he is a bodyguard from some royal family who wandered into the dungeon in order to hone his skills on local monsters, which are like small bugs for him. That guy looked like a man from a noble family, definitely not just a commoner. Frank grumbles that his colleague was dreaming too much, looking at her very, very skeptically. Frey scratches his head. He feels guilty that now, because of his unsuccessful story, everyone thinks of him as a village fool, that he didn't even think to take the award. A man mentally apologizes to a stranger for this state of affairs. In the crowd, a black-haired girl who heard the whole story concludes that this guy must be an incredibly experienced fighter, so he defeated a boss of this level. The Western Dungeon is the place where her girlfriend's brother was last seen. Carme takes the dagger out of its sheath and reads the inscription, "Wait for me." The girl hides the dagger and puts her hand on the sheath, as if afraid that it will be stolen. In the Western Dungeon, not only did her brother disappear, but it is also the place where an unknown person saved her life from a ferocious ogre. Since the boss is defeated, now the hierarchy of the dungeon will change. The monsters will weaken, and that underground world will no longer pose a strong threat. At least a few years should pass before the birth of a new boss. Now the dungeon will be much safer than before, and she will be able to go in search of her brother again. She clutches her weapon in her hands, determined to go in search of him in the near future. Carme missed her brother so much. Frank, having received a reward from the guild, lifts a bag of gold into the air and says that it was worth risking his life for such a mountain of coins. Guido overshadows his joy. In his usual manner, he grumbles that half of all this will go to the treatment of wounds, the purchase of new weapons and armor, as well as rental plans. Was it really worth it? Shelly is still worried about the stranger. She presses her palm to her mouth and excitedly asks, what will they do with that boy's share? Frank shrugs his shoulders and reminds that he ran away himself. No one chased him, thereby refusing the reward. Before saying goodbye, they need to first divide this mountain of gold into 3. The commander gives the coins to Guido, ordering them to be divided between the 3 of them. When Shelly gets her share, Frank puts another small bag on top of what she earned, much to the girl's surprise. With round eyes, she asks why he also gave this money. Guido looks with displeasure at the overly violent reaction of a colleague. Frank, laughing, puts his hands on his belt and reminds her that she kind of wanted to return to her homeland. He becomes serious and says that the path will not be easy, so let the girl be as careful as possible. Schultz, hardly holding the bags of gold in his hands, bows low to him and thanks him for such a mercy. She happily promises that she will definitely thank the commander tenfold. Frey takes her at her word. Shelly waves to her colleagues one last time, and then leaves, happily heading back home. Frank stands with a wide smile on his lips and waves back, but Guido does not try to portray joy for the girl or sadness because of the breakup. In fact, he does not even look at her, not going to give out his true emotions and thoughts on this score. When Shelly is no longer around, he says that the money given by the commander was a donation that Frank received from the church as an orphan who lost his parents during a monster raid. Guido asks if Frey thinks he's wasting this money. If Shelly found out about such a situation, she would definitely scold the commander for showing such stupidity. Having lost his fun, Frank says that every year the number of overpopulated dungeons increases significantly. Scientists agree that in hundreds of years their kingdom, where peaceful people now live, will turn into a huge nest of monsters and there will be no more peace here. Therefore, donations are worth nothing to him. No matter how hard the adventurers try, clearing the dungeons from monsters and helping poor orphans who suffered from the attack of evil spirits, everything ultimately comes down to one thing. Addressing Guido, Frank calls people fools by nature. They will always do meaningless things. Even Guido did that when he didn't throw them to the monster. Gilland asks if he even knows where Shelly went. He answers his own question, to a city that has suffered from overpopulation of monsters. The ruined city of Otfield. Guido thinks that Schultz should forget about this god-forsaken place, but she still returns there time after time. Chrome, still in the dungeon, kills some kind of monster. The system reports that 36 points have been credited to his account for this murder. The guy spent the whole day clearing the dungeon of the remaining monsters in the hope of raising his level a little. However, this did not help him at all. The 25th level out of 50 possible levels was still written in the information window. There are few monsters left in the dungeon, since no new ones are born after the death of the boss. In a couple of days, groups of hundreds of adventurers will descend here for ingredients from the corpses of monsters. There's no point in Chrome staying here anymore. He already searched the entire dungeon for monsters in order to increase his level before going out to the village to the people. However, with the current level, even taking into account the fact that he was clearing the dungeon to increase mana in order to use reincarnation, it is impossible for Lame to enter the city. His original goal is to return to the kingdom's capital to Carme. However, there are too many people there for a low-level monster like him. Besides, because of the darkness of the underworld, the guy could hide his sharp fangs and huge bruises on his face. Such a trick will not work in the capital. If this happens, then where is it better for Chrome to settle? In Chrome's memoirs, Ash says that he won't go into Otfield, even if the guy forgets about it. Ash will not go there for any promised money, because going to this place is like death. The interlocutor, Chrome still in its former guise, asks why this place is so bad, since he receives such negative reviews from residents. The man in response almost roars and asks that is this guy joking? Is he completely unaware of the situation in that city? After the monster attack, Otfield turned into a real ghost town. Even if there are sudden monster raids, riots, robberies, expanses, and murders, everyone will still not care about his fate. No one in their right mind would ever come into this rotten little town. This memory pops up in the mimic's head for a reason. Lawlessness reigns in that city, so his appearance will not cause many questions. He will turn into a human with the help of reincarnation, and during the day he will wear a cloak with a hood to hide his fangs and too obvious pale complexion. These protective measures should be enough. Chrome can stay at a hotel upon arrival and restore his mana behind closed doors of the room in order to become a human again. Also, thanks to the ingredients that Chrome managed to collect from the corpses of monsters, he will be able to earn a little extra in Otfield. This money is even enough for food and housing. The idea seems just brilliant. The guy gets out of the dungeon and gets under the sun's rays. His next stop is the town of Otfield. The streets look desolate, and what is most terrible, it's like a hurricane has passed through them. The walls are cracked, fallen pieces of stones and wooden beams are lying at the foot of the house. Chrome, having turned into a man, muses aloud about the destroyed city of Otfield, through the streets of which he is now walking. This is